Hey everybody! Ooh, I'll use my big thing. So, first stream of the season. I didn't do much streaming with my last summer class, but I usually like to do more. But I just ended up recording a ton of videos for it, so a little less streaming. But we're getting into Zbrush, and nothing says streaming online digital content quite like Zbrush. So I've got my chat popped up. I got my giant monitor with like literally everything displayed on it at once, and I got Zbrush open. So I'm gonna dink around with some stuff. I'm gonna block out some characters because the ZBrush class I'm teaching right now, characters are what we're working on. And I want to show you a little bit of workflow of how I block things out, some of my philosophies, some of the different tools. And I think like I'm gonna try to like just take a character, and I'll be back on Thursday and work on it too. And so I'm gonna stay in ZBrush and see how far I can get a week. And if I can make like a character a week, that'd be pretty cool. I think that's going to be my personal goal, is to post every Friday like a finished piece, because that'll like really kick my ass a little bit, and that's what life's about, right? So let's jump into it and pop into the right monitor. I got my camera. I'm in this corner down over here. On that side, oh, wrong side. On that side over here, I got buttons that you can tell what buttons I'm hitting. It's all very exciting. So I got ZBrush, and this is just a little sculpt I was dinking around with this morning, playing with a couple different techniques for building up proportions, because this is what your primary form is really about. It's about trying to get something core. It's about trying to build something that reads the right silhouette. A fun trick you can always do in ZBrush too is in material. You can go into outline, and ooh, there's actually one without the outline. This guy right here, or this guy, but it gives you just the silhouette. This is the first read of the object. Nothing about the surface, nothing about light reflecting off of it, just how it looks. But of course, anyone who's taken any ZBrush stuff with me or seen me stink around in the background knows when I'm doing my blocking, I love basic material. And when I'm doing refinement, I like basic material too, because I'm looking for the way light's reflecting off of surfaces. I'm gonna stick with basic material 1, and I'm gonna start this from scratch, make another character, so I can have this as a reference in my background, but I can just launch right into it from here. Again, I got the chat open, so feel free to ask any questions. If I recognize your name, I might empower you to administer too, because sometimes I do that. I used to have Dewey do that, but Dewey graduated tier. So, there's a lot of times you might be working inside a ZBrush and you like lose your model or something like this. Not as common anymore, but it happens when you turn edit off. It gives you a warning now, which is really great. And if I switch out now, you'll get this. And if I hold Alt, it actually cuts it away. This is because it's working inside of the 2.5D mode. I can't, in fact, tumble my directions at all. To get rid of all this, the first most important hotkey in ZBrush to learn is Control-N when I'm in here. Now I can just drag out a single one, and I can hit Edit, and I'm back into 3D mode. So let's get back out of this and say I don't want this anymore. I want to start fresh with something new. So a sphere is, in character art, maybe the most common thing you're going to start with in ZBrush. It's like a ball of clay, and we can drag it in any direction. So I just drag it on my canvas, I press T or go to edit, and now it's here. The newest version of ZBrush, 2020, and I'm on 2021.4, has this little head up in the corner, which is a little widget that lets you know where things are facing, which is so great. I'm so glad they added that, because it used to be so confusing about what way things were pointing. And they even added this little tool that's like a little silhouette or highlight tool, which is so cool because it basically does exactly this, but automatically for us. So as we're working, we can kind of get a read on how our object is shaped. So to start this off, character is obviously not just one single sphere, unless we're talking about Kirby or something like that here. It's usually a lot. So what I like to do is I'm going to swap over to my move tool. It's also W on your keyboard, and this lets me move stuff around. But I'm going to take this and I'm going to duplicate it and move it. So I can make my head. This is going to be my upper torso. And let's do duplicate, move that down, make this sort of like my midsection, and duplicate it one more time for my hips or my waist. I kind of like this spheres approach. So for my torso, this is like my chest is here, my midsection, like my abdomen is here, and my waist or lower torso is down here. And then this is my head. And I need one more of these, so I'm going to duplicate this and make this the neck. Now, with this little widget, I can start scaling things, and I want to make sure everything's in symmetry, so I can press X, And you'll know, oh, I'm also facing the wrong way. So I want that head facing me, because if I press X, we can see my little red dot goes on both sides, means it's working on both ends. And I can stretch this, squash this, because this is going to be the basis of my neck. Not going too crazy with this right now, just a little bit of moving. And then we can start taking these and thinking about how we would shape this into an overall torso. So this is where I'm going to want to hit X, and I want to use my most important tool for blocking in, the absolute most important brush, which is BMV for move. In fact, it's so important, I'm going to create a special shortcut for it. This is a default layout for ZBrush, and I almost never work with the default layout. I like to navigate through these interface layouts until I get this guy. It's called Compact UI Brush Materials. It kind of gets rid of a couple things I don't use up here. It tightens up some stuff, but it's very similar to what a student's usually used to working with. I actually have a lot of custom UIs that I worked on over the years, and I kind of always come back to this pretty standard way of working because I find it's just especially easier to teach. So on the bottom, I can click different materials. I can go through, we'll go back to basic material, different brushes, but I want to customize this to get what I want in here. So I'm going to start out by opening this little tab, this little divider, by double clicking it. I want to get my brush menu and drag it over here. And I could leave my brush menu open and just pick them out from here, but I want them to be down here. ZBrush has maybe one of the most confusing UIs in the world, but their defense is always, well, it's the most customizable. You can do anything with the ZBrush UI, which is true, but like, man, it would be nice if I didn't have to, but you have to. So I'm going to come up into preferences, I'm going to go to my config, and I'm going to turn on enable customize. Because I often want to customize stuff and I want to turn it on and off, I like to move this enable customize to right there. And I can do this by holding Control and Alt, or Control Option if you're on a Mac, and dragging this word enable customize over there. And now I can turn it on and I can turn it off, and it's sitting right there. I'm going to get rid of all these brushes and widgets by Control Option and dragging them, or Control Alt and dragging them onto the scene. And now I have this, Control Alt, and I can set it to move. It's my most important brush. I'm going to use it a lot, so I set it right there. And anytime I want it, I click it, and now I'm in that tool. S key brings up my draw size. You can use the bracket keys like you do in Photoshop, but look at how long it takes me to change the size of this brush. S key, just grab it, move it, it's great. Way faster. When I'm sculpting, especially when I'm starting things out in block off, I keep this brush really, really big. And the reason for that is because I often want to make big changes. If my brush is small, because I think this is how big I want to move, we start moving sections that are too small, and pushing around form becomes this sort of push and pull. We often get really awkward shapes from it. But when I'm in this initial stage, I keep the brush really, really big and the geometry really low. In fact, I'm making the brush as large as it will go. We're going to fix some of that in a second, though. So I'm going to start by building out some of the basic torso. It's also really helpful when I'm working with something like this to think about the concept I'm going off of. And well, why not? Let's talk about that for a second too. Because the image you pick, the reference you choose, is almost as important as, well, everything else. Because it's our starting spot. I like to think about concept art the way I think about like films. Like concept artists are like the writers, and 3D artists are like the directors. They work together. The concept artists come up with a lot of the ideas or the things that are going to happen, but it's the director's job to make it happen, to fill in the details, to turn it into something usable and functional. So there's a lot of cool kind of character designs that you can find on ArtStation. It's one of my favorite places to go. And especially when you're starting something out, pick something that's not made in 3D already, something that's 2D, and something that has like good, clear, very cartoony lines. Like this concept, this piece from Valorant is great, but it's the 3D model. I don't want to work from a 3D model because I'm not gonna do it. I'm not gonna get it in my brain. It's much more interesting to work with a model that maybe isn't 3D modeled yet. And so, I mean, the gamut is really run across ArtStation. You're gonna find a real wide variety of stuff, from like things I really like, the kind of art I wouldn't put in my portfolio because I think it's a little bit like risque, but that's just not my style. So I'm going to go to digital 2D, and I'm going to set my subject matter to like character art I usually do. Character design. Let's see what we get. So we have a whole host of interesting character designs. This one's pretty fun. It seems like a pretty lively character. I like her kind of hip hop attitude and stuff like that. That's a really nice one. I'm gonna hold on to that for a second. Clicking onto here, and you look through and you just try to find something that seems cool, especially something that hasn't been done a lot. There's a guy I really love, Shane Lam, I want to say. He did this piece. Let's see, Facebook. So he did. You see this? This is all stuff that's based off of just one of this guy's concepts. So Shang Lam, and he did this really cool post that just kind of blew up a little while ago. And so it was like a year ago, and he posts these concepts, and as soon as I saw it, I was like, oh, I gotta model one of these. And then he discovered like every single one of these has like 8 different things in ArtStation. So like I wouldn't recommend doing that as a piece because someone's already done that in 3D. In fact, they've done it a lot. I like this character. She's got a lot of personality. It's pretty stylized, but it's got like interesting movement to it. The person's put a lot of thought into who this character is as a personality. I like the shapes. I like the rhythm of it. So I think this is a good concept to go with. This is a good image. It's going to show some close-up stuff. This one's going to give me more of like the character's full body. So we kind of got like, this is very much feels like an animated character kind of piece. So if I go in and I take, I think this one right here is the most full body. That kind of gives me like the character's movement. I like the little bandage on the knee. It gives me the idea that she's like a professional dancer in like a hip hop troupe or something like that. Maybe she's gotten, she really like dances professionally, and that's like one of the reasons maybe she got a little injured. Kind of gives you that athlete vibe to it. So I'm gonna take this one right here, this little concept, this little piece, and I'm gonna put this inside of my scene to work with. This is where we can go in, and I'm gonna go to textures, and I'm gonna drop this image in texture by going to import. And my desktop really needs to be cleaned up. I got like pictures of Jeff Goldblum without a shirt on in here. Like not something I need to have. So let's go into, here we go, Julius Caesar. Now, whenever you're working from a concept, if for instance I was gonna post it on my own ArtStation or use it as work, or you were gonna use a concept like this in class, always, always, always reference the artist who originally did the work, and in fact, link to their piece. It's not like common courtesy. It's something that if you don't do it, people are going to think you're ripping off someone else's design, and you can get in a lot of trouble for that, and people will not be very nice to you because they don't like that kind of thing. So under texture, I click this little art piece, and I can go add to spotlight. That's going to bring in this whole thing right here. Now I don't want the whole thing right here. I want to just scale it down and bring it out so I can just kind of get the character's proportions and sizes. Now, ideally, you'd have a character that we have like a T-pose or something like that. It's a good reference. I'm pretty good with anatomy and proportions, so I don't really need that much. I'm just going to kind of stick it off to the side in the corner here. And on this little wheel, I'm going to look for opacity. Let's crank that up. And then I can press Z to turn off spotlight. This is going to turn off this little widget. Now, the big problem I have is some of my tools won't work. So anytime you're using spotlight, we got to go down in here into samples under brush and turn off spotlight projection. Just otherwise, it assumes we're trying to use this to like paint textures on things. It's a whole other workflow. Don't worry about it. We just don't need that. So I got this. I'm going to open up this scene. Let's hit Z to open this back up and just push it off to the side. So this is the character that I'm kind of going for. Let's scale that up a little bit more. So I use this as like my key reference image right here, because this is going to give me like a height, a head, because I'm thinking about like how many heads tall is she, what's her general proportions. So let's go down here, and I'm going to alt click to get to my next tool. Still using the move tool. And again, my brush is too small. Let's get real big with the brush, because I want to build out my torso. So this should sort of angle back. I'm trying to build it like a rib cage. This guy, I forgot to hit X to symmetrize it. So we can fix that by going down to geometry. And under geometry, modify topology and go to mirrored and weld, and it will symmetrize it. Shift will smooth things out. And now I'm working properly in kind of both sides here. Let's take alt click, take this guy. Let's scale this up a little bit. Let's move it up a little bit more. I'm going to angle it and stretch it out. kind of an egg shape for like our torso. She doesn't have like really wide hips, so I'm gonna try to avoid being too exaggerated with that. I have a tendency, I know, as an artist, to go a little overboard with especially hips on male and female characters because I find hips really interesting as a shape, but I'm trying to follow the concept and that style. So I'm going to try to avoid going overboard if I can. And right now I'm trying to pick a spot and make sure I'm in symmetry. Let's go ahead and mirror and weld, sure. And I'm just trying to find a spot that the body's going to come from. Notice already I'm building a curve into it. One of the big mistakes I think people make when they're doing character work is they make them too stiff. And if you look at most people, there's kind of a curve, especially accentuated when you're looking at really interesting character design. They tend to have a lot of curving forms. Let me get this a little bit more rib cagey shaped. Also, when I'm looking at the side here, I always want to make sure I got like an angle or slope because our shoulder is at an angle coming down, not flat. So, and you can see that on her, like her strap of her top here comes down at an angle because it's going across the chest, kind of angles like this. I have some resources I'm going to post for the class, and if you want it, you're just generally out there. I can post. I have a really big thing. Oh, hey, Evan. Hey, Jay. Good to see you guys. I've been so focused on my thing, I didn't even notice you guys popped into the chat like that. I know sometimes people like to just have it on the background where I'm dinking around and stuff, because it's fun. So it's good to see everybody in here. So let's go ahead. I'm gonna just alt-clicking on stuff to get into scenes, moving around. Let's take this head, same deal. So this head, it's the first head I did, and I didn't turn it into a polymesh 3D, which is not great, but I can fix that by appending a new one. So I'm gonna click append, and I'm gonna go to one of these spheres down here, because I don't actually need this head now, because this head is not a polymesh, so I'm going to delete that. And now I have this head, which is a polymesh 3D. Normally, if you're starting out, you could just click the button up here, make polymesh 3D, but if I did that, it would get rid of all the other work I did, and I don't want that. Now I'm just trying to fit this into the shape of a basic head. Of course, I forgot to do symmetry on this guy. So make sure I go back down here, mirror and weld. Thank you. And again, big brush, just kind of pushing and pulling the points around. What's kind of nice too about ZBrush's new features, there's kind of a head reference right there. And we can see from both our character and our guy, we're kind of looking for something pretty round, and then it drops down as a chin. I have a tendency to elongate the head a little too much. And I want this kind of hit like a little shelf where the neck's gonna connect. I can use smooth here to kind of shrink things down at this stage, but it's almost all just the move tool. Head's a little too wide. We don't want it to be too egg-headed. And in fact, if you're looking at a real skull, the back, right, this point right here is its widest point. Everything else kind of narrows from there. So something like this is a pretty good start. We can see it. It's a torso. We get the idea. Evan, it's hot. It's really hot out. I took a walk just before I did the session. It's like 95 degrees out where I'm at. Burning out there. I've been sweating up a storm lately doing all this outdoor work for my backyard too. So now we got this, and let's start making some of the legs. To do that, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to append a new sphere. And I'm going to alt-click it and go to W to use my move tool. Let's move it down. Scale it straight up because we want the length of the leg. The nice thing too about having this here as a reference is I can kind of pop over anytime. Let's hit Z. Let's change my opacity to be a little lower. And what's cool about it is I can kind of just bring my character over and say, like, reference-wise, just by zooming in and out, how does it feel like it lines up? I think the neck needs to be a little bit longer. Torso, yeah, okay. So like I can choose this as like, wow, okay, this character needs like a whole longer neck and everything like that. I'm gonna take the head then, shift it up a little bit, and then take this neck. And so I accidentally hit Shift D. I don't need that. Fine. And you know what? This is, yeah, backyards are nice, but they're also, you know, it's like having a dog. It's a lot of work. I'm sure Jay can also tell some horror stories of home ownership, but that's the dream, isn't it? It's every millennial's dream to own a home. And I'm achieving that dream, you guys. It is possible. And also, she's kind of got an interesting taper to her neck that I want to get into this style. So her neck tapers in. This is the advantage of keeping everything separate right now, is it's really easy for me to add that tapering feature now. And if these were all fused together, it would be really, really difficult. This is why I like this block-in technique a lot, and I think one of the reasons, especially for stylized characters, it's really taken off as an approach. It just gives you a lot of flexibility. Because I want this kind of like interesting curvature to it, something like that. Yeah, I'm liking that. That's looking pretty good. Of course, I'll combine it all together a little bit later. Home ownership's a trap. That is. So, oh shoot, where was I? Oh yeah, playing with the proportions of this character. So I'm going to pull this torso up a little bit. And again, torsos generally goes up this way, down this way. There's kind of a curve, a bean shape to it. This is kind of serving as like my whole like butt leg kind of operation right in here. And I can take this guy and instead of just doing another append, since it's already kind of where I want it, I like to hold control down. And now if I drag, it makes another one and masks the old one. This is cool because I can like this, hold Alt to scale it, bring this in a little bit, and this becomes my lower leg, which is proportionally the same size as my upper leg, which I should have anyway. And this way, I can take my move tool and use this opportunity to shape it. An oval is one of the worst shapes you can have for character design, at least when you start, because there's no directionality to it. And if we see on this character, look at the peak. It's not a perfect oval that would put the peak of the leg right here. Instead, we see two tapering shapes. What we really want is to bring this up, like so, narrow it down here, and then add a little curvature to it. So kind of pull this back a little bit, and then if I hold control and click off, I alternate this mask. I want it to be a little flat in the back of the leg and a little curved in the front. And the same thing, I want to have the outside of the leg, the peak, kind of like sort of slopes up in. And then it has the next kind of little bit there. I want to get a nice little taper for everything. And don't forget when you're doing these character designs, especially with legs, you have to leave room in between to fit the other legs. There's the ability to articulate and move. When I got that, I can now replicate this and put this on the left and right side by going into Mirror and Weld. Now, this was a problem because we see it when it moved over. It's because I have local symmetry turned on. Let's turn that off. And now it's going to use universal symmetry. Everything's mirrored over. Great. I got two legs where I had one. And make sure I turn on X. This is going to let me shape things by themselves. So I'm going to get into a rough shape to start with. Of course, it's not nearly where I want it to be. But let's build the arms next. If you saw from the videos and the guides I put in, I really like, especially for people starting out, there's so many different block-in techniques. And in fact, if I can indulge me for a second, I can jump over. If you just search ZBrush block-in, which I did, you can see how many different approaches there are. This is the tutorial, by the way, that I'm sort of following along with because I think he has a nice simple start. But we can see that especially for stylized characters, these block-ins are like really where the action happens. And it's like whether, you know, like this frog guy, I've seen there's like this ostrich, any kind of character you want to do, we can do a block-in like this because we're playing with shapes. I used to use ZRemesher, not ZRemesher, Z-spheres a lot for this, and I don't really anymore. I still like Z-spheres, but so many people have moved over to the block-in kind of format because it's easier to control. Z-spheres can be a little finicky, but I like finicky, so that's why I like it. But I'm showing you this technique because I found for students who are starting out especially, it produces better results. So now let's do the shoulder, and instead of doing another append sphere, I'm actually going to draw a sphere on there. Now come to think of it, I'm not going to, because I actually want the geometry to be pointed a specific way. So I'm actually going to go append. I'm going to add another sphere, sphere 3D. Let's click the sphere, W, and I can move it over, scale it down, and make a little shoulder. This is a thing that I really like. I used to just make the arms straight out, but after seeing like Danny Mac and Shane Olson and Polygon's kind of guides, they all recommend kind of starting with like a little deltoid piece because it's a piece of anatomy we easily forget. This is our deltoid here, and it like connects from here all the way down to here. It's a lot of space on our body, And it also helps define the armpit. So without it, we have a really hard time hitting those sections up. But now I have this, and I can use that same trick I used on the leg, where I hold control and I drag out. And now I stretch out the arm and I rotate it. Something like this. Now here's what's cool about this tool, this little widget. You used to have to do everything with this guy, which I did not like. Fortunately, we have this one. And the advantage of this one is I can hold Alt and move its position around. So that lets me actually swing the arms. This is important because I'm thinking about my landmarks. This elbow should come, like the pit of my elbow. If I lower it, it should come right about to where my belly button is, which is pretty close to the intersection of my torso. So this is just about right. I can thin up the arm too, like I mentioned before, by like dragging on this y-axis and then holding Alt, which helps me kind of scale its thickness to fit better with the concept. Move it back a little bit. Make it a little thicker. And move it into our position. We do this modeling, we call it A pose. Legs are relatively straight or a little angled out. Arms are out to the side like an A. We do this instead of T pose like this because a T pose requires pretty extreme deformation of the deltoids. And T pose is great for rigging, and we often move an A pose figure into a T pose when we're doing a AAA character. But for this, A pose is what we want. It's going to be easier to pose, it's going to be more natural. Hold Alt, drag along that y-axis, and then I'm going to stretch out a little bit this way, squish it a little bit this way. This becomes the new basis for my arm, and we're back to my move tool. So the same kind of deal, I'm trying to get a good taper, using smooth to kind of shrink stuff down, and creating a taper to create some interesting shapes. I'll come back to all of this though. Control click, and I'm going to show you a new tool too, besides the regular move. A new brush, BMT. It's called Move Topological. What's cool about Move Topological, I drag it into here, turn off Customize real quick. Now I got Move and Move Topological. Move will move all of it. Move Topological will only move things that are connected. This is really great for when I'm working on these little pieces one at a time, so that it lets me kind of adjust the shape of this arm, thinking about the apex, which on a bicep is a lot higher up, and I can even kind of build my elbow into it, smooth some things out. So let's do the same thing, like so. And you know, what I see here, I'm ready to start forming the whole thing into one piece. But first, I'm going to do some work on the hands and the feet. So for the hands and the feet, I'm going to use a different tool, and I'm going to go BIT. This is another way of adding in geometry, and insert sphere is an option here. But we want to make sure we're in Q when we do it. Otherwise, it won't work properly. It lets us draw in objects like so. And I like it so much that I'm going to drag it, enable customize on. I'm going to drag it down. I like to put it over on this side of things because I want to use it separate from my regular sculpting tools. Pop it back out, enable customize, and I'm going to drag out a hand. Now, when you're just starting out, I don't recommend doing fingers. Fingers are a lot. And in fact, when we're thinking about articulation, between your toes and your fingers, your feet and your hands, that's about a little more than half of the bones in your rest of your body combined. That means there's a lot of complexity. There's a lot of articulation in fingers. They're very small to work with. And so when I start with working in a character like this, I actually just start with the hand in a simple fist, and then later I'll cut it off and replace it with a hand or a foot that I make more specifically. So this is the technique I'm using here. So I'm just starting out, and let's just move it into position. Get it roughly where I want it, go back to my move tool, and start shaping it. And let's use a couple different tools in here to shape out the fist. A couple of the tools I really love for this stage are the pinch and the trim dynamic. So I'm going to open this guy back up. So BPI is pinch. Let's drag that into place. I'm going to put that maybe right about, I'm going to put it over here. I'm going to go BIN for inflate, another tool I really like for this stage. I like to put pinch and inflate together because they're kind of the opposite. Inflate balloons things up, pinch like really narrow stuff together. And then I'm going to look for the trim dynamic, BTD. I know all these hotkeys in my head because I use them so frequently. but I almost always reference them from down here. So I'm kind of arranging these down in the spot. Notice I haven't done any clay buildup or anything like that yet. I'm just working with the simplest stuff I can. So turn off customize, and this is going to let me, with this trim dynamic, brush on. And I try to be pretty gentle with it because you can see it's really easy to obliterate our model. This is also why pressure sensitivity is really necessary, because if I click it with my mouse, it doesn't really work properly. I need a pen for this, for these kinds of brushes. And I'm just trying to flatten some things out. And then come back into my move and turn this into my hand or my fist. And I can take my inflate. Let's inflate a region for my thumb and say I'm going to be making a fist here. Let's bring it up. Something like this. I want to split this hand from everything else because I'm going to want to do a little Dynamesh to it to get a little bit more detail. So if we can see right here, this is all masked and this isn't, but also these are all one color, this is not. This is how it should look for you when you hit Shift F, because it's going to show you the polyframe. And you can see these are all green. Well, this is a different color. So I can come into split and go to group split, and it will separate my hand from everything else. Now I can take this hand, I can do that Dynamesh, and depending on the scale, it's going to Dynamesh it for me. A little high, so I'm going to undo that. I'm going to set it to something like 32. Because I like to go as small as I feel like I can get away with at this stage. I can always up it later if I want to. So let's turn that off. And now I can do a couple different tools. Actually, let's set that up to 64 instead. Now you notice I drag and nothing's happening because it hasn't perceived a change. If I literally make any change, it'll now retopologize it. If you ever wondered why that's doing that, why? So now I need to cut some shapes into this hand. Let's pop into solo mode so I can see it by itself. And to do that, I'm gonna need some new brushes. So I'm gonna bring 2 new brushes. Clay Buildup, Damien Standard. So BCB, maybe one of every most popular brushes in all of ZBrush is the Clay Buildup. And Clay Buildup is, it fills in gaps, it builds holes, but it's usually just used to knock in shapes. Here is a thumb. Here are some fingers running along the hand. And we can see Clay Buildup is going to give us a lot of the core shapes that we want for all of this. Pretty fast to knock in too. Now Damien Standard is for cutting in. So BDS, Damien Standard, lets me drag that in. And Damien Standard is for cutting into stuff. Also, auto-saving reminds me it's a good time to save. Always save with Control-S. Don't do it any other way, you'll get confused. ZPR is what I want, and I'm going to call this Hip Hop Dancer is what I've decided to call this character. And I'm going to save it. I'm going to put it on my desktop for now, but man, I need to clean up these files. So be better than me, you guys. So I'm going to put it in there. Now I have a file saved. I have a place to recover. So I put in some real rough stuff. I'm smoothing it back out. I'm ZRemesher. I'm doing the Dynamesh thing. But let's go to Damien Standard, and now I can start cutting in some details. Like, where does my thumb go? Because it should wrap around the hand, like so. Where are the fingers? And I'm going to keep it kind of like a mitt. I'm going to keep it pretty simple for right now. And I can use things like pinch to help define the spots in between. Draw across a little bit. Because a fist is its whole own kind of shape. I'm going to make a little crease like this. You know, I kind of think of working this stage reminds me a lot of working on pixel art kind of stuff. I'm just trying to build things up. So Clay Buildup's really good for this. Getting that palm in there. And then I'll erase back here. Try to get the idea of where the fingers really form in. So we're not going for perfection here. This is the idea of a fist, and it's supposed to sit in for where a full hand that I'll model later will eventually go. But I can turn solo off now. And now that I have it in kind of place, it's much easier for me to pop in, move, adjust it, and get it to fit my shape a little bit better. Make it feel like it's naturally coming off of this hand a little bit more than what I had before. Cool. Let's do a little feet here. So insert sphere. I'm going to make a sphere right down at the bottom. I'm going to hit W. Now this is gone for the length, like where it is initially. To reset these, I hold Alt, and I'm going to hit this little guy. It goes to unmatched mesh center. And I'm going to hit this little roundabout guy because it's going to reset its orientation. Actually, I click this besides it. No, I don't want to do that. Let's do that. Yeah. So this is going to reorient things. It's going to set them up where I want them to go. I'm in symmetry. That's great. I'm going to narrow it a little bit. Let's turn on L symmetry so that it doesn't pull together. It's now working on its own symmetry, which is local symmetry, which is really convenient for this kind of thing. So I'm building out the form of the leg. Maybe I need to make this a little bit bigger for the feet because I'm trying to think about her proportions. She's got pretty big shoes, and I'm going to build on top of it, but it's going to get the idea across. And now I'm going to hold Control, and I'm going to mask the back here. And this means when I go into my move, and I want to start pulling this out, I can start just shaping a basic version of the feet. And I like to go to the bottom a lot and then to the sides. So I want to hit both angles. And of course, I don't have quite enough geometry yet. I'm just trying to get the basic shapes. There should be a curve on the inside, a curve on the outside. But let's unmask all that, smooth it out a little bit, and let's go to split by groups. So this is going to be its own group, just like I did with the last one, making sure I'm on the right object. If any time you're on something like this, so I'm on this foot and I can't find the widget, if you hold Alt and you click on something, it's going to move that widget to it, and now I have these options to get all of my settings back. So with this on, let's turn on Dynamesh. 64 was a pretty good number for feet, or for the hands, so let's try it for the feet. And now it's mostly just shaping it. You know, feet aren't that flat. They slope up pretty aggressively. Not only do they slope up, they have kind of an angle to them. I have a lot of work to do to fix some of these features. I'm going to just do a little smoothing out right now. I want a curvature of the feet. We think about like the profile of, and again, I'm looking at the bottom angle so I know which direction everything's going. But I'm thinking about like you look at your own tennis shoe. What's the shape of it? Kind of give it this paddle kind of shape. Feels a little bit more natural. Let's lift this up a little bit, pull this heel down, and we want to push the corners in. I can take my Damien standard and just kind of cut in a little bit and then smooth it back to get the sense of like a heel. And this is a great spot for clay buildup because I'm trying to build up form kind of at an angle like this, and I smooth it back. Some people really don't like the clay buildup smooth back technique. I personally like it, but especially if you're doing stylized characters, it makes a lot more sense. If you're trying to do like more realistic creatures or concepts, often you can over smooth, and that like loses some of the beautiful detail you build in as you're working. But because I'm doing something more stylized, I find this technique works really well for me. But everyone's got their own workflows. That's one of the things that's cool too about ZBrush compared to some other programs, is there's such a community around it. And if you go like literally every day on the streams, Pixelogic has so many daily streams from incredible artists doing really cool work and showing you their whole workflow start to finish. And I don't know a lot of other companies that do that with their software. ZBrush is expensive. It's a little tricky to learn at first, but it's absolutely worth it, especially if you have any interest in concept art, 3D art, anything like that. ZBrush is the program, in my humble opinion. But I mean, you just look at any production CG artist, whether it's for film or games. Man, ZBrush, they use it for everything. Even something like League of Legends, they don't even do high detail characters. They're all very low poly stylized characters. They use ZBrush for their whole character pipeline. It's really important. And they actually will take a Dynamesh version of their model really early to hand it over to the rigging kind of people. Really cool. So I got it here. Maybe I'll put in a little ankle. when you're working on characters, especially unless you have like a huge library of anatomy in your head, like I do, you want to have a lot of reference up with you. But that's one of the reasons I have my PureRef board, which I'll gladly distribute to everybody. PureRef is an amazing tool. I use it all the time because it's a great place to like load up all of your reference at once. So if I go to load, recent, and I look at my ref board 2020, if you took Ricardo's anatomy class, you'll recognize this because I think he hands it off to the students. And I'm constantly adding to it because it's my own reference board, and it's like almost a gig of just photos all assembled in one reference board. You see how long it takes to load. But this is something, especially if I'm working on a really realistic character, I like to have up because you don't want to leave stuff up to the imagination. So I've got very in-depth breakdowns of a lot of stuff on here. And this is a great, I like this tool too because it's like middle mouse click lets me drag around and see stuff, zoom in with the wheel, and then I move the whole thing with right mouse and it stays on top of my screen. So I'll often be sculpting. I'm going to go ahead and close this throw off the side because this is mostly what I'm trying to reference off of. Now that I got this, I'm going to mirror the arm over. So mirror and weld, L symmetry off, mirror and weld, and do the same thing with the hand. I got the whole body. It's not exactly where I want it, but I got all of the features. Now we want to get like the proportions nailed in. We want to fix some of the shapes. So I could combine all these together. I can merge them all together, but a really cool thing we can use under Z plugin. I actually didn't used to do this way, but watching the Polygon video, he did this. I was like, that's a great use of Transpose Master. Z plugin, Transpose Master, T-Pose Mesh. It's going to turn all of it into one polygroup, which is great because now I have a single polygroup everything's connected to, and if I use my Move Topological brush, I can affect either whole things at once with my Move tool to hit whole regions together, or use Move Topological to move just one part of it. Do, however, want to make sure that symmetry is on. Now, before I do this, you'll notice this is as big as my brush can go. This is a problem because I want to make much bigger changes to my character. So now that I've got it all set like this, I'm going to come down to deformation, and I'm going to come into unify. And unify is going to like resize everything to my canvas. It makes it really tiny, but if I hit F, it zooms in. And now I can see is this is now the biggest my brush can go, which can be really convenient if I'm just trying to push and pull the whole shape over. Like I have a lot more control over adjusting the character's like weight, pitch, proportions of like the torso. Like I get a lot more control of making adjustments like that than I would otherwise. So it's a good time to do a proportion check. So let's hit Z to bring in my reference image and try to get a sense of, scale this up. And I know my character is in motion, so it's a little hard. Let's go to the opacity, lower it a little bit, hit Z. Now I'm just trying to check things. I'm trying to use the head, the top to bottom of the head. Even though our head's tilted back, I'm trying to get it proportionally just about right. Okay, and then I'm using my Move tool to adjust now, like my hip to leg to opening ratio. And that actually wasn't too far off. That's not bad. Turn that opacity back up, crank the scale back down. Maybe I'll use this guy and kind of just tuck it over there. Okay, so now I can go in and we can see like some of the stuff I need to fix, like the taper in the legs. Get a lot bigger. So I got to get like these tapers. I got to get the torso more correct. And I think my hips, as usual, are a little too wide for the character. People come in all shapes and sizes. There's lots. I love experimenting with like different body types. It's really fun. And so don't be afraid to like try something a little different. I know like almost every tutorial on like making a body, especially stylized bodies, like ideal forms. But that's boring. I think it's more interesting to try stuff that's different, that's not as, you know, traditionally masculine or feminine, because people come in all shapes and sizes, and so you get to try that out too. I find every time I stream, I turn into Bob Ross for 3D art. Like happy little characters. So I know I want my apex of my leg to be something a little bit more like this. There's kind of a kite shape the lower part of the leg. And I know I've kind of got this, and I want this like S curve to the leg. Come a little forward. This can lift up a little bit more because this is sort of supposed to be like my knee. And then I can take both these together and move them as a unit with my regular move tool. But I always want to make sure I kind of have a center of balance. Like I want to make it feel like the character can support their own weight. So like if my leg was back here, this would be bad because clearly the character doesn't look balanced. And same if I had the character too far forward, it doesn't feel balanced. I want to make sure that not only my proportions feel just about right, but that my character feels like they're achieving some degree of balance. Take move topological. I have like this groin area, I'm a little wide with it in the style of what they're doing. So I'm gonna move them in, and I'm gonna use the select rectangle here. Lets me click something like this. And if I kind of click this, it hides everything else. And so I can take it and let's go move and local symmetry. Make sure. Hit this. There we go. I'm gonna tighten them up a little bit and then bring it back, which is a little bit better for what I'm trying to do. Off. I want that on. So this definitely is kind of like my character's foot area here. A lot of people get embarrassed when they're first doing, especially for first doing character art, you're not used to it. Butts though are an important muscle group and really definitive of the legs and their opening. And yeah, I do a lot of concept. I do a lot of sketching. I like to start my mornings off with some like really rough, like 2-3 minute body sketches of real humans kind of in pose, because it helps you create interesting characters, helps you build a mental library of movement. Let's go ahead. It's built in here. So her torso is pretty narrow and it really tapers in. And then this is more of like, I want to get this more rib cage like. I'm not even really worrying about the breasts yet. I tend not to think with female characters about that until after the fact, because it's not super structural to what I'm doing. I want to keep things pretty proportional, and I want to think more about the anatomy, the underlying structure beneath, before moving to, you know, more of those like surface features, which I think a lot of people when they're starting character art get caught up in, especially pecs, abs, you know, biceps, things that feel kind of like the more glamorous or sexualized kind of things. And to me, that's not what character art's about. I'm just trying to express, like, I like this character because of the mood, because of the attitude. I like it because it's fun and it's interesting, and I want to know more about the character as like a person. And that's what kind of makes a good character artist. Are you interested in people? Are you interested in what they're doing and what they're thinking? So I'm going to narrow this down a little bit. And again, using the stage, using my smooth to kind of shrink features up. She's got pretty skinny arms, but I don't want them to be too skinny, but I also don't want her to be too overdeveloped. I have a tendency, I find, when I'm sculpting, to go a little overboard with the musculature because I like it. I'm interested in it so much. And so I have a tendency to go overboard with fat and musculature and bony landmarks because I find that kind of stuff interesting. And knowing your own quirks as an artist is important to avoid pitfalls and traps. So I feel pretty good about the core proportions. I want to make sure that eventually I'm going to get this real sharp shoulders. I love those. That definition on her shoulder is really interesting. So when I get to a stage like this and I'm kind of like getting my proportions a little bit more where I want them to be, let's fix that up. And I can create just a little definition for this. Like I said, butts are important. It's best not to forget them. Butts are also something people tend to think of as like bubbles, but they're usually not. They're usually much more like a shelf, and it has kind of an interesting shape. Like it kind of comes in and then it sort of shapes out like so. And so when I'm roughing it, especially here, I'm just trying to build the anatomical sense of it. So I like go overboard and then I smooth it back out. But we'll get back here. We'll work a little bit on some of this in a second. So I can use this pretty large to help me just define up. That's where that is. That's where this landmark is. My arms are kind of in the way right now of being able to see that. I don't really like how far back they are. So this is a good time to make some adjustments to my arms. And like rotate them forward a little bit. And one of the things that's cool too about some of the tools is we can use our mask lasso. And I can draw across like this, control click to alternate it. And W, click that. And I hold Alt to sort of orient this in the right direction. So then I can just rotate it forward. And then I can do the same thing with the arm like so. Just moving up, control click, Alt, move it into place, figure out where it is, maybe adjust, rotate, and move some things here a little bit. It definitely feels like head-wise and everything leaning back, so just keeping my brush really big. So this is like all the stuff I'm trying to define right now. I can always change things later. Now, I think I'm ready to put some stuff together with this character and dynamesh it so I can start building the next stage. And I'll show you what that looks like. So let's go ahead and I'm gonna go into, and notice I'm keeping the head super simple right now. And I actually picked this character because the anatomy of her head's really simple. We're gonna work on heads a lot next week, and so I don't want it getting too complicated with the faces yet. There'll be time for that. So I'm gonna go ahead, take this object, go back into Z's plugin, and go T-pose to sub D, which is gonna rebuild our whole shape, one by one, and now they're all separated back out again into their own subtools that can be worked on by themselves. So now I can come in and I like to use, you can use some other tools, you can keep sculpting them as individual pieces, but what I'm gonna do is merge them together and turn it into a single dynamesh object from here. I don't have to, but I think it's the stage I wanna show you next. So I could keep this separate for a little while still, but that's where I wanna be at with it. You want to go at this level as far as you can, but I want to spend like, I could spend another 6-7 hours just hitting these anatomies, like proportions and everything exactly where I want them to be. But who's got that kind of time? I definitely look at her proportions. Still a little wide here in the, like my torso region. She's got a very like thin torso is kind of like a definition of it. And her hips are pretty narrow too. Okay, so when I got all that, and I like this element of the character, again, I'm not thinking about her coat, I'm not thinking about her shoes, or not thinking of her head, I'm just thinking about the core proportions of her body. Let's get back into this head really quick, because this head isn't quite right. This is a time to go through and now one last opportunity to make some real adjustments to things. So I like to use things like pinch and flatten here. So I can trim dynamic up the side of her head, which is going to help define the flatness. And if I flatten it that way and I can see it moves, it means my head proportions aren't quite right. I kind of tuck it in a little bit more like this, kind of narrow up the head. Got a pretty wide dome though, so I want to keep some roundness in it. Something like that seems pretty good. You know, I'm trying to hit these features. Kind of got that real narrow chin, so I can kind of hit a pinch. And then I like to draw across with pinch, which helped me define some of the planes of the head. So like, kind of like curve up here. Let's use Dame Standard. I'm gonna make like a little shelf back here. Go solo really quick. I like to cut back into this. Let's go ahead and dynamesh this by itself. Geometry, so I get a little bit more control of the shape. Now my scale of everything's changed, so my dynamesh you see is a lot lower. So I'm actually gonna go 256 with it. Dynamesh. The numbers don't matter, it's all about the scale of the object. So I can go trim dynamic, trim this up, trim dynamic. Whatever plane it's on, it's going to try to adjust to. You see, it kind of gives me this head plane. And you can look, a really good reference for this is like the shape of a human skull. I'm trying to like define this kind of curvature, the way like the head and the skull all going like this. Clay buildup will give me kind of that little form under it. Turn solo off because I need that little area just under the chin. The jawline and the chin line are not the same, and so it's sometimes easy to think of them as the same thing, but they're not. And then with inflate, I like to make like a little eye sockets for the character, just like that. Maybe move it a little bit to adjust where the brows are. But I'm just looking for big landmarks, key features. I'm not even doing the nose right now. Even if I wanted to, it would just be a little insinuation of a nose more than anything. I'm trying to get kind of the character's profile. But I'm going as far as I can with this. I'm not even worrying against like things like ears, stuff like that. Not even worrying about it. Just trying to get the overall shape. So head-wise, let's take this little torso. And thinking about shoulders are really important here, and often pretty tricky to get just right. They're often an afterthought when we're building like the whole chest. It's one of the more complicated areas of our arms, our shoulder, our armpits, all of this coming in together. So this is a good time to make sure I'm giving it enough love and attention. I like to use the upper, so if you think about my elbow, like as a straight shot, especially from my knee, it's a straight shot. Here, like my elbow feels like it's coming a little bit more off of my forearm. So I'm actually going to reverse these guys really quick. Take my move topological and try to build this up and over. Because it's like, where does the shelf kind of go? I'm going to build up with play build up a little bit. Smooth it back. Like I said, it's easy for me especially to get overboard with some of the anatomy. But I'm resisting. Sometimes too, to build musculature, the inflate tool is really nice for that. Because you can just draw across it, but I'm not trying to go too muscular with any of this, because that's not the character's style. I think a lot when I'm drawing these shapes about the profile of the shape, and by profile I mean if I sliced it, which you can always check by going Control-Shift, going down to Clip Curve, and clipping it, and I'm looking at the profile, and this is exactly what I want for my wrist. It should be thin through here, and it should get a little rounder in here. And like my bicep should have this kind of profile here, like that kind of shape. So that's feeling pretty good. Let's take a look at these legs, and I'm now gonna, help define. I kind of got there's a really big important muscle that goes across the leg, and even if I'm going really stylized, I like to insinuate it. And pinch is also really fun to just create some shapes and some lines. So if I take like this part of the torso, pinch can help me just shove things around to help me define, especially stylized anatomy. It's really nice for. That, though, is a pull everything's coming to. I'm going to have to Dynamesh that to fix that guy. But we'll get there. Legs, bottom of the legs. I've been working on this a lot. I still feel like it's a little thick in here. That's not bad. Get all this up. Definitely the top of the knee is more where I think about. The knee comes more from the top of the body. Feet feel better proportion because she's got these big shoes on. So I like that she's got big, kind of got these larger feet. Just kind of hit up, make sure my ankles are all right. That my character, again, feels gender proportional. I think, looking at this right now, body-wise, if I'm looking at it, it feels a little diminutive to the rest of the body because this character design has a really big head. I'm going to put it right about here. Give it a little bump. Not too big, just a little bit. Something like that. Feels a little bit more correct. I do these at this stage as much as possible because it's harder to change this stuff later. So when I'm here, I'm not going to, like I said, not going to worry about ears for this. I'm just going to focus on the body. Not thinking about nose, eyes, eyelids. We'll talk about all that next week. I just want to talk about body stuff. And so we're going to need to start forming some things together. In order to do that, I want to take all these objects, tool, and let's just start merging them all together. There is a merge all. which isn't a bad thing to go with. What happens with merge all is you'll say merge visible, and it will look like nothing happened. What it actually did is created a new tool, which is this guy, which is everything merged together. So it's unlike it's similar to that T-pose, but it's not undoable. So take all this, it's all one object, and before I do anything, I like to go down to polygroup and auto groups. This makes everything its own separate polygroup, and you'll do this because when I do my Dynamesh pass, the geometry, let's do Dynamesh. It's a little low. I like to work low, but that's a little too low. I'm going to go 2, 5, 6, trying to keep it pretty similar levels. You'll see if I hit F, it still has all the subgroups, which can be helpful for isolating groups. Keep it like that. Now I come through, now that I've Dynamesh, and I just do X, mirror, and weld, because I forgot to do that. Let's save it real quick. I'm going to say hip hop dancer Dyna. That lets me know I Dynameshed it together. Sometimes I'll do hip hop dancer V2, so I like to save it at major steps. That way, let's say I screw something up and I'm like, oh gosh, I really wish I had still had the version where everything was separate pieces. Guess what? I can go back to it. So I'm just kind of coming through, trimming things up, hitting it like lightly with a couple of my brushes, especially the smooth brush, and I can start shaping things out. This is the point now where we're almost done with this stage. And I'm sort of using, I like to use trim to kind of like carve some shapes out, flatten some surfaces, especially like face planes and stuff. Face planes. Thinking about my neck, thinking about like, this character is very smoothed out, so I don't have a lot of musculature. If this was like a character that had more realistic anatomy to it, I'd be thinking a lot about like my neck muscles, my back muscles, stuff like that. Anyone who's watched any of my streams knows that like I love stuff like that. I do want a little sense of trapezius back here because it helps get this sort of building. Also, pro tip with clay buildup, I almost never stretch across. I like dragging across it like so. Oh man, don't know what I said, but I am hemorrhaging viewers now. Probably because I said I'm just about wrapped up with this stage. But this is kind of where I want people to be more or less today on the project. Questions out there from the general gallery of folks, people who are watching over in Wonderland. So again, not thinking about clothes at all, purely thinking about shapes, silhouettes, and proportions. Gaming standard is really fun to use with Option or Alt because it helps me like lift things out. So it's helping me get this sharpness of her shoulders. That's like a defining character thing. I'm going to sort of insinuate the deltoid by brushing across just slightly. You know, get a little line in here, helps get the idea of a lot of shapes. Same thing with the knee. Her knees are really subtle, but I'm going into a little bit more detail. Concept art is always going to be more subtle than the 3D art that it's based off of. Concept artists insinuate, they sketch things out, and sometimes features work better as lines, but in 3D they need to be defined. So her ankle is something, you know, or like this line on the knee is not necessarily something I need to sharpen up or define as much normally, but here I absolutely do because it needs to be able to read from multiple angles. I'm gonna kind of do a little pinch here, work back here, do a little clay buildup. Try not to go too overboard with this. It's going to be under some gym shorts too. I just need enough that's going to define the geometry. So thinking about that little, getting that, like that, I think about it as like a shelf, that foot shelf. Back of the leg should be relatively straight compared to the front. And this needs to come down a little bit lower. I want to define a little bit straighter here. And build up is exactly what it sounds like. I use it really lightly, brushing across to just build up form in an area. And often I'll be painting on here, like brushing on here, but I'm actually looking at this side because I'm seeing the profile change here. So I'm smoothing and stuff like that, and even though I'm drawing on here, I'm looking at the silhouette change over here. It gives me a lot more information. Because there's sort of like, almost like a Pringle shape that goes on. Kind of curls up. Like, people think about this in an exaggerated way, like this kind of shape is a way you can think about this region. Because we want it to come up and then have a little, there's a little dimple or divot back here. Get my spine engaged, so draw some little lines running up the back. Move it out, get the spine. Thinking about shoulder blades. Especially on like a skinnier character, they're going to have more defined shoulder blades than otherwise. Okay. Thinking now about like her chest and wanting to make sure I have enough structure to build her clothes off of. Again, it's like taking into account gravity. I could definitely build this with geometry too, because I can always add new stuff. So if I don't have this feature yet and I want to add something new to it, because I like to think about this purely, like I said, first, this full chest region as a rib cage first. And thinking about the shapes of a rib cage. You know, this is like my clavicle up here. Kind of carving that out. Clav goes up into here. Nice and flat across the top. And I'll even go trim dynamic on it. Flatten and then flatten across. Thinking about the shape. A woman's rib cage tends to be more narrow. So men's tend to bow out more. So like you keep it pretty straight. And then I can take and do my insert primitives and use this as a starting point. But being realistic for the character's body type. Again, I think this is an area where I find it's pretty easy for people to go overboard with the scale and shape, and I don't like that a lot. And I find it, I don't know, I find it a little gauche, and it's like, people, it's like 2020. Let's take it easy here. I see a lot of the character concepts too, sometimes on like ArtStation, and I'm like, that's not going to get you a job. People find that, like, some of the designs I think are a little demeaning and not particularly realistic. And realism is what we're kind of aiming for. So there's should be a slope kind of back, like so. Because gravity is a thing and it affects all living objects. And so when I have that, it's pretty easy to just Dynamesh it again. Make sure my Dynamesh is still on. Go. And it just helps me bring it back into the character. Again, the character is never going to be depicted in the nude or anything like that, so I only need enough structure to build on top of. I definitely think this is a little far out. Like, I like exaggerating when I'm doing these kind of things too. Like this shape, I like pushing it out a little bit more. Because like I said, the spine is where things get really interesting. If your arms are something that's getting in the way, quick way we can get rid of it. Control Shift, let's go to my select lasso. And if I start drawing it, anything in the green line will be shown, everything else will be hidden. Or while I'm drawing this, I could take my fingers off, then press Alt, and anything in the red will get cut off. So this is an easy way to get at something that I otherwise would have a hard time accessing. So I want the spine, I think about like the small of the back. Should be a pretty straight line into the small of the back here. And then it similarly has like a peak. So there's kind of a line where like the tilt of our body and everything should be a little bit more leaned up. I have my perspective off for a second. I want to leave that on while I'm working on this. Definitely the feet, still think even for this character are maybe a little too big. So I can always take this, I'm going to mask it. I'm going to control click on it a couple times. Control click off of it to invert it. Hit W, Alt and click. Center, rotate, then I can position this where I want it. I know a lot of steps, but it's all a lot of steps to do that. And now I can just turn it back, go back to my move tool, smooth things out. Much, much quicker way of doing things. And inflate. Ankle's got a little narrow. Okay, and I can control drag, control click, control shift click off to get all that back. Okay, I like a lot of what's going on here with it. I like some of the shapes I'm getting. Everything's still masked, I think. Why is my move tool being weird? And customize off. Interesting. That works. So I have something with my move tool. It got added to. I don't know what's going on with it, but if any time your brushes aren't doing what you feel like they should do, hit B. When this brush menu, we can do reset all brushes, and it almost always fixes all the problems. Let's see if it did it. Yep, brush is now back to normal. Thank goodness. So I'm just about wrapped up with what I want to do today because I don't want to get too far ahead of ourselves. But what I would be doing with something like this is taking it to this stage and then coming into my Dynamesh resolution and upping it. I usually kind of double things. And when I do this, I start getting more density to work with. When I have that larger density, I can use this to help me define and sharpen areas that I want to think about on the body, areas that I want to like think about like where different features are going to be. Using it to kind of like sharpen up things that I didn't quite have the geometry to do before. So keeping it soft, and as always, like keeping it pretty subtle. Going back like this, a little play build up, and smooth back. You know, I have a lot more that I can work with on the neck now. A lot more that can kind of go into a jawline. And even the idea, because I'm not even trying to make a mouth, I'm just trying to get the idea of a nose and a mouth. Because I don't really have the geometry to pull off a full face. But I can think about it. Think about the profile of a small, pointed nose, like we might see on this style of character. Maybe too small and pointed. So, I think I'm going to call it a wrap for this session. I know this is the part where it's dangerous because I could spend the next several hours. I do want to get a couple features. So one of the things that's really important about the profile of this character is that taper. I really don't have that down quite yet. So again, brush really big. Let's exaggerate the shoulders. Narrow this waist in a little bit because we're trying to get that. And then her legs are more of a straight shot. We're kind of getting this as a shape. So I think with this character, this is the slope. So I have it pushing right out. The slope is a little higher up here for the style of character. So I'm gonna kind of push this maybe over to right here. Pay attention to that shape and get that curvature right. This is something I like about character art is there's always like tiny ways you're improving things and thinking about the shapes that are involved. We kind of have this curve and it kind of hits a little cut in here. So to do that, I'm just gonna focus on this for a second and think about, instead I can build this up. I'm gonna just lift this up this is that leg muscle that kind of goes across, and then smooth it back. And it's going to start to give me that idea of this muscle. A couple of muscles that go along the back here too. They're smaller and a little subtler. And then along the back of the knee, there's kind of like three major shapes. There's like this big shape along here, and then like this shape and this shape. So you can see, like, I don't have to put a lot in to get the idea of that shape in. Part of that back. But I just want the idea of there's a wider spot in here. Inflate, and then deflate, and then inflate, and then smooth it back. Kind of gives me some of the features I'm looking for in the leg shape. Yeah, this is definitely something that's tough when you're working on a character, but I enjoy, like, I would recommend, especially if this is your first time doing something, finding something that's more of a neutral pose. I could have kept looking for something until I found something that had more of a neutral pose, but man, I like the vibes I was getting from the character, and sometimes that's just as important. It's like, is this a thing that you'd want to keep working on? And I like the sassy vibes. Good to hear from you, Evan. Coming in just as I'm about to jump off for the day, though, unfortunately. Knees, that's a whole subject. Ooh, one more thing on my legs. Definitely think about, if you feel on your own leg, the bone that's on the front of your leg is really strong. Name escapes me for the moment. I think it's fibula. Yeah. 100%, yeah, Evan. So I like to kind of just take something like this clay buildup, and I just drag it across like so. Take my trim dynamic and kind of flatten it, dynamesh it, and it's kind of a trapezoid here, so this is sort of flat, this is sort of flat, and then I can smooth it back, and it gives it that diamond shape that I'm kind of looking for. And then on the back here, I'm going to kind of put in a couple lines and then smooth them back to give me the rough insinuation of where my calf muscles would be. Like I was saying, it's so easy for me to just go overboard with the shapes of all of it. So I don't know, this was... femur's the upper leg. So, like, let's just do it. Leg, bones. Heck, my anatomy thing is probably in here. I'm talking about tibia, not fibula. Yeah, it's the tibia. It's the tibia, not the fibula. That was what I was looking for. Definitely just trying to hit my tapers from all sizes. The nice thing about what I'm going to do is, because right now I just need the main features in. I don't actually have to be super precise with it yet, because I'm going to be using a ZRemesher and sub D technique, which is great, because what that means is I'll be able to really conveniently work up and down and lots of details on the model. Otherwise, you spend a lot of time. Man, I keep going way overboard with the back of her skull, making everybody cone heads. It's always good to be aware of, like, your own pitfalls, the things you tend to do by instinct rather than by thinking. And you can see it's like 90% of modeling is just a lot of nudging. Lots and lots of nudging. Good reminder to save. I almost feel like every time they save, I want to save. Where's my... Yeah, my clavicle back in here. My sternomasticoid muscles go from under the ear onto here. I'm not going for like Goku Dragon Ball Z style, just enough to get it in there and kind of carve away. This is like a little pit that everyone has, like, right there. Let me get that in. and then drag across on my clad. Kind of has like a bicycle shape to it, like a bicycle handlebar. But I don't need to be precise, I'm just trying to get an idea of it. Something like abs, keep it pretty simple. I'm going to do like this is my rib cage, and then right under that, I'm just going to go kind of across, really, really light with this. And then I'm going to further smooth it. You can see just that little bit gives me just even too much right there. You can go a lot, especially on a stylized character, a lot with a little. Okay, I'm going to go ahead. I'm going to save this at this stage because this is where you want to be. What I wanted to show you, the reason I like the whole Dynamesh thing, and I'll show you the ZRemesher thing, is as I want to add detail, if I want to make small changes, it's actually really tough. I'll be going back over this in a sec in the next session. So I'm going to go ahead and save this ahead of time, and I'll show you what the next kind of stage looks like. And what I do is I take this subtool, I duplicate it, so I have two of them, and I'm going to take this one that I duplicated, and I'm going to solo it so I see it by itself. Right now, this is the geometry. It's not great to sculpt on, it's not great to subdivide. But this is where our ZRemesher comes. So I'm going to turn off Dynamesh on this because I don't want to accidentally hit it. I'm going to come down to ZRemesher. And if I leave everything as exactly as is and I just hit ZRemesh, it's going to take a second to process. And it's going to create a topology that better suits the surface. A couple of the videos I've linked for tomorrow are going to go in much more depth on why this works and how it works. But what it's going to give me is something that's a little bit more sculptable. The advantage of this is it's easier to push and pull the points around. I try to generally, I like to start with target polygon 5 like this, exact like this. And here's what I do, because I sometimes I want to get a little bit more precise, and I want to get the lowest resolution I can get away with while still having the shapes that I want. So after I do this, I set it to half, and I ZRemesher it until I really start to lose stuff. So I kind of go as far as I feel like I can get away with, which you'd be surprised how far you can go with something like this. I think this is fine though. This is a good level. Now this, of course, I lost all this detail that I made, but this is what's cool about this. I can now take this guy and subdivide it. It's only, what, 2,000 active points right now, just about 3,000. So subdivide, 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 and I want it to be about half of whatever's here, because that's my Dynamesh, and this is my other guy, so it's about half. Of course, it's all smoothed out to all get out, so it doesn't really have a lot. I start at my lowest subdivision level, and I'm going to go into Project, Project All. I hit D to go up to my next level, Project All, D to go to my next level, Project All, D to go to my highest level, Project All. This will take the longest, but it shouldn't be too bad. And now I have a model that if I turn it off solo mode, they're indistinguishable from each other. Let's take this guy, and we can see, if I put them next to each other, they look exactly the same. The difference is this one that I'm working with, anytime I want to make small changes to something like, you know, okay, I want to build up the knees a little bit, make something really subtle in here, I can do that. Or I say, you know what? Solo it really quick. Oh, you know what? I actually want the whole arm length or shoulder or something like that to be different. That's really hard to make big changes to like her torso position right now. But if I take and I go shifty, 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 well, now changing some core shapes is a lot easier because I'm working with a much, much lower resolution version. That's going to help me get some of the profile of maybe like, oh, I kind of want my rib cage up, and then the stomach comes back, and then I can just go up in resolution and make some adjustments and some edits. Let's go maybe down to this level. And so I'm working at like multiple levels, you know, getting a like kind of an insinuation of a belly button there. And then I can just go up in like subdivision levels. And this means it's really flexible for me to go up, go down, make big changes to it. That's why I'm saying in this stage, I want to make sure my features are there, my proportions are generally correct. I can always go in with the ZRemesher version, and I have a lot of flexibility to sort of, not truly non-destructively, but quote-unquote non-destructively fix stuff. So that's what I'll be covering more in depth in the next session, as well as some of the details that you can carve out. But I'll see everyone for that on Thursday, where I'll go through this process and then how we can turn this base sculpt into things like clothing, and how I can actually make a lot of the clothing for this character off of the base mesh really quickly, especially have a ZRemesher version. Thanks for tuning in, everybody. Always great to see people drop in. Current students, former students, shout outs to Evan and Jay. Good to see you guys, and everybody else. Keep pushing stuff out. Can't wait to see what everyone comes up with. I'll see you on Thursday. I'm planning on doing every Tuesday and Thursdays, starting at like 3 or 4 and ending around 5 or 6. So try to do at least an hour and a half, depending on what I got going on that day. So good seeing everybody. Stay safe, and I'll see y'all real soon. Gotta find my sign off.